Eduardo was a handsome young man who had studied diplomacy and political science at an international university. He came from a family with good financial resources, so he had a very comfortable life and took a few years to have fun after graduation. When that time ended, Eduardo started applying for jobs. Luckily, an international organization became interested in his services and almost immediately called him. The young man met all the requirements they were looking for. Therefore, a month later, when operations began in the country, he was leading the institution. The job was quite relaxed, and he was very happy because the salary was high, which would contribute to a better standard of living than when he was under his parents' protection. Eduardo was 25 and hadn't taken on any obligations until that moment, so all the money was disposable. His lifelong friends were always waiting to invite him out to party. Eduardo loved to dance. Every weekend, he went to a nightclub specializing in salsa, for which he was well known among the city's salsa community. There, he met a beautiful young woman named Andrea, who not only had a sculptural figure, but also danced like a professional. The young couple became partners, and Andrea joined the group Eduardo hung out with more often. However, those nights were not just about dancing, but also about alcohol, cigarettes, and a lot of junk food, causing Eduardo to gain significant weight. He also neglected work on several occasions, showing up at the office with alcohol on his breath or being unable to attend field trips due to being unwell. The final straw was when he didn't show up at the institution to celebrate his birthday for 2 days. His superiors abroad were surprised by his lack of responsibility, so they summoned him to the central office. There, they gave him an ultimatum. If he didn't change this careless attitude at work, he would be dismissed from his position, regardless of his academic merits. At that moment, Eduardo understood he was throwing his life away and decided to change those habits. With the transformation he wanted to bring to his life came discomforts, as his inseparable friends no longer wanted to be with him, saying he had become a perfect bore. But that wasn't all, as Andrea also shared the same opinion as them and decided to end her relationship with Eduardo, claiming that youth was meant to be enjoyed and she was not willing to leave that lifestyle. Eduardo was disappointed with them but decided to take refuge in his work, and his institution began to stand out from others in the region, earning him recognition and congratulations for his determination and good work. One afternoon, while heading home, Eduardo collapsed at the office. The ambulance arrived within seconds, and he was taken to the hospital. The excesses of unhealthy food, alcohol, and cigarettes had taken their toll, and now he had a heart injury threatening his life. Upon learning this, Eduardo cried at the hospital, but the nurse taking care of him said he could have a long and pleasant life if he was disciplined with his medication, diet, and moderate exercise. Margarita, the nurse, was there to console and advise him, for which the young man was very grateful. 2 days later, Eduardo was discharged and asked Margarita to become his personal nurse to help manage his medications on time. The beautiful young woman, 5 years older than Eduardo, accepted the proposal and immediately resigned from the hospital. Margarita spent the entire day with Eduardo, even accompanying him to the doctor's office to deliver medications on time. After living together for 6 months for so long, Eduardo asked Margarita to have dinner together at a restaurant, where he told her about his feelings, expressing that he was very much in love with her and wanted to try a relationship. The beautiful nurse was very surprised because although she was also in love with the patient, she considered herself inferior due to her economic situation. But social class was the least important thing for Eduardo, and his family agreed to give that romance a try. A few months later, the couple got married and led a very happy life, especially with the birth of their first child, Eduardo Jose. Margarita also made sure her husband did the correct exercises to keep his heart in excellent condition. So she accompanied him to the gym, kept him on a strict diet, and administered his medications diligently. When Eduardo Jose was 5 years old, his brother Roberto was born. The children lacked nothing, and the marriage was a true example for others. Margarita continued to work as her husband's private nurse and took care of the children, who, like their father, were educated abroad and decided to stay and live there. Just as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, the couple's disaster began, as they had a party with the presence of their neighbors, including Ramira, a statuesque young niece of one of the homeowners who had recently moved there. Mr. Eduardo's eyes widened when he saw the girl and, the next day, had lunch with her secretly from Mrs. Margarita. He told her he was about to retire and would receive a large sum as a pension, which motivated the young woman to fall in love with him. It took the family only a month to convince him. In a frenzy, Mr. Eduardo packed his bags and told Mrs. Margarita that he was going with a real woman because he couldn't stand being with an old woman like her anymore. This separation was bitter for Mrs. Margarita, who suffered every time she saw him leave hand in hand with that young woman. Mr. Eduardo had to bear the expenses of the young woman, her mother, and the woman's aunt, as they all lived in the same house. While he worked, the women lived a life of luxury and assured themselves it would be better when they had the pension. However, when the retirement time arrived, Mr. Eduardo was surprised that the amount he was entitled to was the minimum wage, due to all the medicines the insurance fund had invested in him. When Romina found out, she kicked Mr. Eduardo out onto the street with his suitcase and took his luxury car. With little money left, he rented a small apartment. From crying so much, Mr. Eduardo suffered a heart attack, and the apartment owner immediately took him to a public hospital. Upon hearing this news, Mrs. Margarita arrived promptly and managed to transfer him to the best clinic in the city, paid all the expenses, and told the doctors that, anything they needed, please tell her. When he recovered from the crisis, he found out who had saved him and went straight to his wife to thank her and ask her for a chance and forgiveness for the terrible wrong he had committed. I took care of you in the name of the love I had for you. And because our children were desperate, we paid for your treatment without expecting anything in return, and I am happy to see you recovered. I recommend that you take your medication and please do not come back to me because the wound you inflicted on me is like a nail in a wall, meaning it cannot be fixed, said Mrs. Margarita. After those words, she closed the door in front of her husband and continued to live in that small apartment, consumed by loneliness and guilt. Well, my friends, this is the end of today's story. We hope it has always been to your liking. We invite you to give us a like, leave your comment, share on your social networks, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. A big hug, and see you soon.